Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to share with you a bit of a case study from one of my cases. Yeah, okay, that seems to be working. Before I do that, I know I've spoken to a few of you today, and there's also quite a few of my clients here, or my firm's clients here already. But if anybody would like to have a chat with us about bringing a claim, then please feel free to come and see myself or Sarah and Christy at the back afterwards. Also, you've got packs on your tables with all of our information on. So if anybody would like to make an inquiry, my phone number's there, email address, and so on. So if anybody is thinking about bringing a claim, then please do get in touch. So I'm going to talk about a case that I ran a few years ago. And then Stephen is here. Stephen is a client of mine from very recently, and we're going to have a bit of a chat about his case, and hopefully he'll be able to share a bit of the client experience with you. So first of all, this case, Peter was a middle-aged man with a 10-year history of lower back pain and recurrent sciatica, and he was seen by his GP on the 22nd of June at 5 p.m, and he had two problems. He had left shoulder pain and sciatica, and his GP prescribed him with naproxen and also gave him some leaflets with exercises for back pain and shoulder pain. But the big issue in this case was Peter given any red flag advice or safety netting advice about the symptoms of Cauda Equina? And this is what the GP wrote down. As you can see, GP, it's not the sort of best spelling. Going back to the last exercise, you probably could have done with a bit of that. But yeah, I'll just leave you to read that rather than reading it out. But the key line is the second to last one. History, sciatic, which should be sciatica, also playing up, no red flags advice also. So just interpreting that note, sciatica also playing up, no red flags advice also. No red flags obviously means the GP has asked Peter if he's got any red flag symptoms, and he said he doesn't. But what does advice also mean? Dr. B, the GP, says it means he also gave advice about red flag symptoms. But it could be interpreted as general advice also given. So if this was a lecture to GPs, then I'd probably be saying you need to make better notes. And so we had a conflict of evidence. This is what Peter's witness statement said. Dr. B certainly did not go through any of the red flags in relation to Cauda Equina or explain anything further about sciatica. Due to my health background, Peter was an occupational therapist, and the fact that I put a great deal of importance on my own health, I would have taken any advice given to me very seriously and listened avidly. And this is what Dr. B says. As recorded in my consultation note, I gave Peter safety netting advice. I advised him to return to the surgery if his symptoms did not settle, and I told him that if he developed any urinary or bowel dysfunction, or any numbness down below in the perineal, perianal, or buttock areas, or any weakness or numbness in his legs, then he needed to contact the surgery as soon as possible. Or, if the surgery was closed, he should contact the out-of-hours GP service or attend A&E straight away. It is my standard practice to explain... Oh dear, I don't know it by heart. It's my standard practice to explain that the need to seek urgent medical advice is because potentially this could be quite serious, and I believe that I said this to Peter. I also provided him with a patient information leaflet about lower back exercises. So I don't know what people think, but if he actually said that, then it definitely wasn't negligent. I mean, that's pretty good, right? That's very thorough. So what happens next? So the same evening, Peter develops sensory disturbance when urinating, couldn't feel it very well, and he thought that might be the naproxen playing up. The next day, He noticed delay in starting urinating and reduced flow, and he also noticed altered sensation in his buttocks. Again, he didn't do anything because he thought it might be the naproxen, and he hadn't been given any warnings. Then at 3 a.m. the next day, he got up in the night to urinate, and he noticed loss of sensation around the anus. And at 7 a.m. that day, he noticed sensory loss in the buttocks and penis. And Peter's wife looked symptoms up on the internet, and she found Cauda Equina syndrome, and that's when everybody panicked. So he rang NHS 111, explained what was happening, and was told to go straight to the emergency department. He did that. He was triaged at 9:14 on the 24th of June. 11:30 to 12, he wet himself twice. Seen by a doctor at 12:15. MRI scan organised urgently. And by 4:30 p.m, he's transferred to the neurosurgeons at a nearby hospital, and he has a discectomy operation that day. And what was Peter's outcome? Well, he was left with permanent urinary incontinence, fecal incontinence, loss of sexual function. He uses intermittent self-catheterization and manual evacuation. So his mobility and pain slowly improved. He returned to work as an occupational therapist after about a year. And the following February, he had a heart attack. He had 2 stents fitted. He made a good recovery, but he was off work for several more months, and then took medical retirement in December, which is about 18 months after he developed Cauda Equina syndrome. So I'm going to talk quickly about the legal case. So Peter instructed me, and after taking a detailed witness statement and getting all his records, I got some medical evidence from an expert in GP care who's called Dr. Bint, who is an expert that we use a lot. And Dr. Bint's opinion was essentially that if Peter's account was correct, and Dr. B had not given him red flag safety netting advice, then Dr. B was negligent. But, on the other hand, if Dr. B's account was correct, and he had given red flag safety netting advice, Dr. B was not negligent. So we had basically a he said situation, just a conflict of factual evidence. Causation was actually relatively straightforward, and by causation I mean what would have happened if he'd been advised properly. So Peter said if he'd been warned of the red flags Cauda Equina syndrome, he would have gone to the emergency department later on the evening of 22nd June. And that was the first time that he noticed anything, if you remember, which was just that he couldn't feel, he noticed a change of sensation when he was urinating. At worst, he would have gone to the emergency department on the morning of 23rd June, by which time he had reduced flow and altered sensation in his buttocks. And our expert neurosurgery evidence was that on either scenario, he would have been operated on by the evening of 23rd June, and he would have had a much better outcome. So just to explain that a bit more, essentially Peter was CESI. He was incomplete until the early hours of 24th of June, and he became CESR, meaning he'd gone into urinary retention in the early hours of 24th of June. And surgery after that point was not going to restore the majority of function. And eventually, when we came to exchange expert medical evidence, we found that the experts for each side did not really disagree on causation. And in fact, the GP experts agreed as well. And they both simply said the same thing. If Peter's right, then Dr. B is negligent. And if Dr. B's right, he's not negligent. So what were the prospects of success of this case? Well, I think you're probably thinking it's about 50-50, aren't you here? This is quite difficult. We knew Peter was going to be a good witness. We didn't know whether Dr. B was going to be a good witness. But on that basis, we decided we're going to fight on, and we'd let the judge decide at trial. And we had to persuade the insurer backing the case to let us go to trial, and our barrister wrote an advice saying that prospects were 60-40 in our favour. And I've put there, I don't know if he really believed that, but you know, he was prepared to say it, and we were prepared to go and fight that case at trial. Before we have a trial, we had to work out what the claim was worth, so we got reports from all of these experts, neurosurgeon, neurologist, colorectal surgeon, psychiatrist, care and rehab expert, And also in this case, which is unusual, we had an expert in life expectancy, and this is because Peter had a heart attack. And so the defendants were saying, well, maybe he wasn't going to live as long as he otherwise would have done. And in this case, the issue of Peter's loss of earnings was a very big one, again, because of his heart attack. The defendant said Peter would have had his heart attack and lost his job anyway, even if they treated his CES perfectly. And our experts didn't agree, because in fact he made a good recovery from the heart attack, but this was another area of high risk for us in terms of assessing what we were going to get in the case. So we were getting quite close to trial, and as quite often happens in our cases, we had what's called a settlement meeting, a round-table settlement meeting. And what happens then is that the barristers and the solicitors attend a meeting with the clients and see whether they can arrive at some sort of settlement before trial. And we didn't know what to expect, but we feared a hardball approach from the defendants, largely because they'd instructed a firm of solicitors called Gordon's, who are very tough. And so to our surprise, they made a pretty reasonable first offer. And after two or three hours, we actually agreed a settlement at £400,000. And that was our barrister immediately after the settlement. So we were actually, to be fair, quite surprised at how generous they were feeling, given the risks of this case. So I just wanted to go through some lessons learned from this case. Even in cases of relatively simple sciatica, GPs and other health professionals do need to warn patients of CES red flags. Where there's a conflict of evidence between the GP or the health practitioner and the patient as to what was said, the patient can win that case, the claimant can win. It does help if the GP's note isn't great. And here the GP's note was pretty ambiguous as to whether red flag advice was given. And finally, if you fight these cases hard enough, you can often win them. So that is all I want to say about that, really. I will take questions, but I think probably best to take them at the end. And I want to give Stephen the chance to talk to you about his case. Stephen is not Peter, it's a completely different case. Yeah, if I can give you that, Stephen.
All right. I was diagnosed with Cauda Equina in March 2021. Background history, I so-called slipped a disc when I was in my 20s. And I remember that week quite specifically because we were very busy at work. And I virtually couldn't walk very comfortably for about 2 weeks, and it was very awkward. My boss didn't understand, and it was all very awkward. For years afterwards, I went self-employed as a gardener, and for years when I was doing that, for about 20 years I've been self-employed. I used to have a back problem about 2-3 times a year. And I would go and see the doctor and he would give me some painkillers and I would be absolutely fine after about a week, and that was fine. Then after the 4th lockdown that we had, I had been isolating from my clients, and on the 1st of March I went back to work and I thought I'd pulled something. I did the usual things, did all the exercises that I'd done in the past, and took painkillers, and to me, it felt that it just wasn't right. So I thought I'd give my GP a call and arrange an appointment. Then in the April of 2021, I went to see the doctor and I explained to him that I didn't think it felt right. And I asked him for an MRI scan. He wasn't very keen on doing that at all. And he said that I needed an X-ray. Now, I thought, well, I'll wait for an X-ray, and I had to wait 6 weeks. And I went up to the X-ray department. They did the X-ray, and they then said about 7 to 10 days later I would get a report on the X-ray. And I didn't feel like it was a bone problem myself. Anyway, so I went through the entire summer. My GP didn't get back to me about I went through through to about August time, and I phoned the GP to get an appointment, and he did a phone appointment. He had already previously prescribed me naproxen, and at that call he then said I could start taking amitriptyline as well. And he said the x-ray was clear and there was nothing wrong with that. And I said, well, if that's the case, well, why can't you order an MRI scan now then? And he seemed very unhappy about that, and he said, I think you need to see an orthopedic consultant. And I was very frustrated that he, A, wouldn't see me, and B, wouldn't even examine me to see what was going on. And out of frustration, I made an appointment with a private consultant to examine me. And I made the consultant through one of my clients who happened to be a retired surgeon and got me a referral to see a private doctor. I went to see him, he examined me, and he said that I had single and 2 bilateral sciatica, and he suggested in his letter to myself and the GP that I had an MRI scan. I could have had an MRI scan done privately, but he said he didn't feel it was a very big urge for it, and the NHS could pay for it at that time. So the letter came to me, and it went to the GP, and again, nothing happened. In the meantime, I received another letter from the orthopedic consultant for a meeting in January. And anyway, so I went through into November, and the pain just seemed to disappear. All the pain I was having down my legs and in my lower back just seemed to disappear. And when I got to the appointment in January with Dr. Edwards, I had absolutely no symptoms whatsoever. And I thought, oh, well, it's obviously gone. I'm completely cleared. And basically, Dr. Edwards said the same thing in his letter, but he did give me an open appointment for 6 months, just in case anything appeared. About a week after that appointment, I started experiencing quite severe pain down the hamstring of my right leg, which felt like a knot twisting in the back of my hamstring, and it wasn't most unpleasant. So I spoke to Dr. Google, because of course Dr. Google knows everything, doesn't he? And he said that I possibly had hamstring tendonitis. And I attended the gym at the time, and I went to see my PT at the gym, and they said it couldn't possibly be that, because if you'd had that, you would feel it immediately. It wouldn't come on. You'll feel it absolutely immediately. So I thought, well, this is not correct. So, and it just went on. It went on, and the lower back pain got worse, and then it started up in the left leg again, all the way down the leg in pain, and it was just very, very uncomfortable and very, very painful. So I phoned Dr. Edwards again, or his department, and made an appointment to see him on the 2nd of March of 2022. Anyway, so the week ending the 13th of February, I decided to give up work because I just couldn't stand the pain any longer. I was doing the exercises I was given, and it was just making absolutely no effect whatsoever. That weekend that I had given up, I started then experiencing severe pain in my saddle completely, and where I just couldn't sit down because it was just absolutely excruciating. I phoned the 111 service, so I thought, well, that'll help. And I phoned them about 20 to 8 in the morning. And then at 10:30, I phoned them again, and they said they were very sorry that a clinician couldn't ring me because they were too busy, and I'd have to wait at least 6 hours. After putting the phone down, my partner and I decided to go to A&E, where we sat in A&E for nearly 4 hours. We went through to see a Dr. Griffiths, and he examined me and moved my joints around, which is the most unpleasant experience I had to that point. And he suggested that I had gout in the hip, which I was quite taken aback of, because I thought gout was an extremities thing, and also due to high living, and I suppose we have silly ideas of what gout is. But I didn't think of that. But he gave me a prescription for colchicine, which is an anti-inflammatory. So we drove back down to the chemist and got that. And it seemed to take away the pain for a while. And he said to me that I need to contact the GP surgery when they finish the medication to get a uric acid test. Well, I was up the surgery getting some more pain relief, and I asked for an appointment. So a doctor rang me that evening, 4 days later, after I finished the tablets, and they said, no, it doesn't sound like that to me. I think you need to come and see us. And I did explain to them at the time, I said, I'm not really driving at the moment because it's just so painful to drive because the position I have to sit in to drive. So I went up the following day, I went up and saw my GP. And that this was 2 weeks before I went into hospital. It was the Wednesday before I went to see Dr. Edwards again. And so I went up to see him, and he wouldn't examine me. I knelt on his floor in his surgery because I was in so much pain that I couldn't stand and I couldn't sit. He wouldn't examine me, and he ordered an MRI scan electronically, which I was absolutely astounded about. And he gave me he prescribed me tramadol, some more naproxen, more amitriptyline, and some diazepam for 4 or 5 days. And I collected my prescription, and I went home and sat kneeling at home for quite some time in a lot of pain after that as well. The following week, which was the 2nd of March, I saw Dr. Edwards again. I had to take a friend of mine had to take me into Bath to see him, and when we drove into Bath, we had to lay the front seat as flat as it would go because I couldn't sit, which is the most unpleasant car trip, to say the least. That morning of the 2nd of March, I had woken up and I was partially numb in my saddle, which I thought was notable. And I also went numb in the chair coming into Bath. Dr. Edwards came into his office and he examined me. He asked me to do some exercises. And he'd also said to me that, well, we can wait and see what the MRI scan offers. And I said to him, well, I had some numbness when I woke up this morning and in the car here. He didn't seem to take any notice, so I didn't think it was important. He didn't say, oh, you need to do this, or you need to do something else. He didn't take any notice, so I didn't think it was important, so I didn't take any notice of it. My friend, when I went out, they said, did he say anything? I said, no. So what are you supposed to do? I'm not a doctor, so I'm not supposed to know what's going on. So, and he said to me before I left, he said, I've seen patients in your position before, and they've got better. So you assume they know what they're talking about, don't you? So I went home and I carried on with the pain relief and that sort of thing. Then on the Friday, which is the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, the numbness in my saddle was like sitting on an upturned breeze block, the narrow end of the breeze block, and that's what it felt like sitting. And the only position that I could get any relief at all was to lie flat with my knees bent on the bed or on the floor or something like that. And then the Saturday morning, I then noticed that I was wetting my trousers. And I thought I'd finished peeing, and I hadn't. So then someone who wears nice trousers like these, they change colour when they get wet, which is not great look, especially when you're out. And then on the Sunday, my partner noticed feces on the bed, and it really sort of led there's something I need to speak to the doctor on Monday. Back to the story why I didn't ring the 111 service, which would have been the obvious thing. When I phoned the 111 service they said I had to wait 6 hours. When I came back from the hospital that day, at 20 to 6 in the evening, 10 hours after I rung them, they phoned me to say they were very sorry that a doctor still didn't have time to ring me, which is why that weekend I did not phone the 111 service. So anyway, so I spoke to my sister who had had a back problem herself, and she'd had her back fused about 10 years before, and she said, I think you phone the doctor in the morning and ask for an emergency appointment. So that's what I did. And I phoned the surgery on the Monday morning, which is the 7th of March, and I said to the lady on the phone, I said, I'd like to have an emergency appointment. She said, oh, I've got one available at 11 o'clock. I said, what part of the emergency did you not understand? Sort of thing. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, well, I seem to have gone partially incontinent. And she put the phone down, and I thought, now what? So exactly. And then she came back to me, what seemed like an absolute age, and said to me, you need to phone for an ambulance. I spoke to a doctor, and they said, phone for an ambulance immediately. And at that point, it actually dawned on me, it's sort of like, this is just not a back problem anymore. This is something a bit more important. And it's quite a realization. So then you sort of think, well, just how long am I going to have to wait for an ambulance? That turned up half an hour later, which I was actually impressed at. Anyway, they took me into the hospital, and I sat in the ambulance for about 2.5 hours, and in that time I had to go to the toilet, and they were very keen for me not to walk, but I insisted, so I went to the toilet, came back and sat in the ambulance a bit longer, and then we went into the hospital, and the problem with the NHS, as we all know, is that you can't get into hospital unless there's a bed available, sort of thing, so you just have to wait for it. So I got in, and I went to the toilet again, and they were very keen for me to go in a wheelchair. But they scanned me before I went to the toilet, and when I came back, they scanned me again, and they informed me I was holding about 1 litre of urine. And did I know? It's sort of like, well, of course I didn't know, because it's still in there, isn't it? And then they said, well, you need to be catheterised, and that was not a pleasant experience for, like most men would probably say it's not. But for me, I have a condition called Klinefelter syndrome, which means I have an extra chromosome, but it also means my genitalia is smaller because it's never developed properly. It took them about 4 goes, and the urologist doctors had to come down and do it because the nurses couldn't. So it wasn't the greatest experience, but once it was in, everything was fine. And then they took me to have an MRI scan. Finally, an MRI scan. And then I came back and I sat in the cubicle for a little bit longer. And the doctor came in and said I had Cauda Equina, which didn't mean anything to me. It's just, but what they did say was that I needed urgent surgery. And if I didn't have the surgery, as I understood it, I would die. So, what choice do you have? You have the surgery, don't you? And then I had to go to Southmead, which is here in Bristol, and they took me over by ambulance for that. And that didn't, the operation didn't do until the following day, which was the 8th, which was just after midnight. Anyway, so I woke up in recovery, I survived, and I was very pleased about that. And I also decided that if I did wake up, I wanted every pain relief going because the pain before was just unbearable. Liquid Oromov, definitely recommended. Tastes nice too, tastes like strawberries, it's great. So anyway, during the time in recovery, one of the people that came to see me is the gentleman we saw this morning, was Patrick Shaughnessy from the physio. And he got me up and out of bed. And as I stood up and walked around, it's the first time in well over a year that I had not had any pain. And there was just no pain at all. And it was quite a moving situation. I had no pain, amazing. And Patrick told me that I was actually good and I was mobile and that sort of thing. And the death option was obviously not on the cards anymore, but I could have had limited mobility with a colostomy bag, or even worse, in a wheelchair with a colostomy bag and not much quality of life, from what he was saying. And that was okay. So I had survived with limited mobility, and that was fine. And I relayed my story to Patrick, as he asked me to. And he said to me, have you not heard of red flags? And I said, well, no. I said, what are those? And he went through my story, and he said, well, here you could have been. And if you had been told here, something else could have happened. The incident where I was diagnosed with gout, Patrick told me at that point is when the disc in my back had started prolapsing and crushing my spinal cord. Now, instead of having been told I had gout, when I was triaged, I told the nurse that I was experiencing pain, shooting pain coming out from the hips and out to the skin. And every time you touched the skin, it felt like needles on the skin. What do you think she wrote down? Pins and needles. Now, if she hadn't written pins and needles and actually written what I'd said, would the outcome have been different? Might have been. So, and I wouldn't have to have gone through the process of having an operation done. Anyway, the other thing that Patrick said to me, that he said that you have probably quite a strong case to litigate the NHS. And it was something that I should consider. So while I was lying in hospital, one of the things I did is I wrote my witness statement while I was there, of everything I could remember. And then when I got home, I put dates to it and that sort of thing that I could remember at the time, which is this little piece of paper here. So I then looked into doing litigation because I thought it would be, one of the things that happened to me while I was in Southmead, I had some student doctors came and spoke to me in the hospital, and I relayed my story because I thought it was quite important for people to learn from what had happened to me and maybe help other patients so it doesn't happen to them. Anyway, and when I got home, I looked into the litigation side, and I spoke to a couple of companies in London who quite strictly told me that I didn't earn enough money for them to make my case, for them worthwhile. So that was a little bit of a blow. And so I then looked at companies that were closer to me in the West Country here. I started dealing with a company in Exeter, I can't remember their name, and they got me to write the complaint letters for the 3 doctors that I considered responsible. And I showed them letters. They asked me to put in questions about Cauda Equina, which I suitably did so. After a while, I did that, and then it suddenly occurred to me that I might have to go into the office and maybe sign paperwork or have it sent to me, and it would just take time and slow the process down. So I then looked for a company that was more closer to home, and fortunately, in stepped Simon's company, and I spoke to the paralegals there, and after a period of time, they agreed they would take on my case. And I found the litigation process, it was quite, I went into it thinking that I probably wrote it, like, it would be nice if the NHS learned from the mistakes that they'd made from my case. But unfortunately, it came to a realization quite quickly that that wasn't the case. It was more the case of how much is your case worth to you. And I needed a litigation company to do that for me because they considered things that I wouldn't even thought of considering. I mean, when I get tired, I work about 6 hours now, and I still work as a gardener, but I don't use any heavy machinery at all. I don't do any twisting with my back or anything like that. And when I get tired, I start getting balance issues. Now, so Simon's company told me that I can get these things to put in my shoes, and they start around £300 and work upwards, which is something I would have never considered. Or things like getting a seat into the shower unit, because a lot of people fall over in showers, and if you have balance problems, have a seat. So, and there's a lot of things. I mean, I bought a house last year that is single-level bungalow because I considered that I could have mobility problems or accessibility problems when I get older. So I'm already thinking ahead of what thing, but a litigation company is really useful because they will tell you what else you can claim for without you even thinking about it. My job doesn't really come into it as much because I haven't really lost work. I've just changed my business model as such. But if anyone wants to go through the litigation process, I strongly recommend doing it because this is what these people do for a living. So that it's not, I mean, part of one of the comments I made to Simon was, well, I don't want to be any trouble. And it's not, for you it may be trouble, but for them it's not, because they do this every day. So yes, I had to go and see a couple of specialists, and if my case had gone further down before it was settled, I would have to have gone to see specialists from the other side as well. So instead of seeing 3 specialists, I need to see 6 specialists. But you know, it's not a big deal, not really. So because you want to prove what you've got, and I did win, and Simon did give me a nice amount of money. We got an offer in October last year. Was it October? Yeah. It was October last year, and he sent it to me, and we went into the office and had a chat with him and his barrister, and the offer was 100,000, and Simon said, well, it's basically normal practice to reject the first offer, which we suitably do, and he put a counter offer for 200,000. Result. So yeah, and then a little while later they came back with a counter offer, 150,000, and the meeting that I'd have for the 100,000, Simon has said to me, well, I think the case is worth 180,000, but when the 150,000 pound came back, he said, well, I know the solicitor, I'll give them a ring and ask for a little bit more. If not, we'll settle at the 150. And he suitably did so, and I got £180,000, which I got just before Christmas, which was a nice little Christmas present. So that's my story. Questions?
So it's quite frequent that it's a bit ambiguous. So sometimes, there is some reference to red flags, and often the nature of it is that if you're a GP, you've asked the patient if they've got red flag symptoms. So you might record that, but then you need to separately record that you have given the red flag advice or the safety netting advice. Because just having inquired about whether the patient has those symptoms isn't the same as giving the actual red flag safety netting advice and saying, if this happens to you, because you might not know why the doctor is asking you, have you had any difficulties? Have you noticed any changes with your urination or something? Asking that question is not the same as saying, if you do notice any change of sensation when you're urinating, or any numbness, or all of the other red flags, you need to immediately go to A&E. That's not the same. So it's often quite ambiguous, but yeah, it's a big part of every case, looking for that and talking to the client about what safety netting advice they received and when. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd be really happy to look at your notes and give you a review. I think you need to look at them and look at the context. In that case that I was talking about earlier, you could probably see that as pretty ambiguous, and it might be less ambiguous in your case. If it does say red flag advice given, that's quite difficult to argue with. But then there might be other aspects of your case, because the failure to give red flag advice is only one way into a case. It could be that there could have been a later delay in treating you. It could have been a delay in getting the MRI scan, a delay in getting you to surgery. So red flags is kind of only part of what we look at as to whether there might be a case. Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's that's not satisfactory advice, and you need. Interestingly, actually, because Stephen was talking about this doctor, but the doctor against whom we actually succeeded in his case was a physio. I'm not sure if that was clear from the story, but he was actually a musculoskeletal physio. That was the person that we succeeded against in the case. And in fact, we got to the stage of sending letters of claim against the GP and also the trust that the emergency department Stephen went to. And they denied everything, but it was admitted on the part of the physio. And the way that things have changed over recent years, so many more of these cases are going into the physio system. That's where everyone's diverted into. So we are seeing more cases against physios now. And obviously they have the same duty of care as a GP does. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question. Yeah. Claire, did you want to? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So Peter in that case was going to be a really good witness. I think it probably comes down more to the witness as a whole rather than what they do. You've heard Stephen here today, he's very articulate. I'm sure if we'd had to go to try on Stephen's case, he would have been a great witness. So I think the quality of the witness is the most important thing rather than what they do, yeah. Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I think maybe what lies behind it in a way is that both of the cases I've talked about today have settled for in context, relatively low value cases. Cauda Equina cases do settle for over £1 million, sometimes over £2 million. Those sorts of amounts of compensation are possible, and obviously it depends on the severity of your outcome. One of the most significant factors will be your loss of earnings, if you have loss of earnings. And if you look at both these cases, Stephen's still able to work and in a way that's reasonably unaffected. And in Peter's case, we had this real big complication of the heart attack. So instead of being able to say, oh, we've got 10 years loss of earnings, we've got the defendant say, you've got nothing. You have no loss of earnings because he's going to stop working anyway because of the heart attack. So these two cases are at the lower end of what you could get. And then in Peter's case as well, we were looking at very big litigation risk. Effectively, in my view, really, it was pretty much 50-50. The judge might have believed the doctor, the judge might have believed Peter, who's to say. And so we did make a big discount for litigation risk, by which we mean we say, well, if this case is worth £2 million, we take 1 million, so it's kind of that sort of. So, that's kind of background. And obviously in your case, you've got 15 years loss of earnings and you're a high earner. That makes a huge difference to the value of the claim. In terms of when we start talking about that, the usual process is we get the reports on liability first, we see whether we think we're going to win, whether there's a case there, then we send a letter of claim, we get a letter of response that either says yes, we admit it, or it gets denied. And if it gets denied at that point, we say, well, right, we have to issue court proceedings and we're going to litigate. And at that point, we have to have a schedule of loss. So when we have to have a schedule of loss, that's when we're going to be talking to you about, what is your claim worth and what are we going to be putting in for here. Fine. So does that help?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that the pre-action process will take around about 18 months, so that's kind of before you issue court proceedings, usually. Then if at that point the defendant's coming back, you sent a letter of claim, you got a letter of response that says, yes, we admit everything, then at that point, kind of the end is a bit in sight, because for one thing, you could get an interim payment, so you could start, once you've got an admission of liability, you can actually get some money on account. And then you're going to start getting the quantum reports that enable to value it, and that's probably another 18 months to 2 years. So you're looking at 3.5 years. If it's going to fight, then it's probably more like 4 to 5 years, I would say. It's more standard than no admitting. But standard's probably not the right word. I think they do look at it on the merits. So in Stephen's case, for example, we had 2 defendants deny and 1 admit. So in Peter's case, everything's denied throughout. So I would say it's more common to get a denial, but yeah, I've definitely got a few cases ongoing at the moment where we have got admissions. I've also got a case where we had a denial from a GP on the solicitor on behalf of the GP. We then had a conference with our expert, the barrister, and our expert said, this is the most ridiculous defence I've ever seen. This GP has been negligent in every possible way. And so we actually wrote back and said, well, thank you for your letter of response. Have you considered all these points? And they then came back and said, yeah, we admit everything. So, yeah, you do need to challenge. Yeah, the answer to that, I would say, is not usually. So there's a separate disciplinary process, which is the General Medical Council, and if there has been misconduct, then that's career-threatening. Making a mistake that is negligent will not usually be career-threatening. And I think most people would think that's probably right. We all make mistakes in our careers, and we probably don't deserve to lose our careers over them or be suspended. But if there are certain levels of negligence that could then cross over into misconduct. So I have dealt with a couple of cases where, surgery has been so bad that I think it does verge on that sort of misconduct issue of people being struck off. It's kind of like, how are you even cutting into that bit of the body sort of, level? But in your average case, then no, it's not sort of career threatening for professionals. No, I would say, is the short answer. I think it's really rare, and people are probably wrong to fear that, and I really understand why they do fear that. But I think in the same way as a doctor doesn't expect to be struck off for making a mistake, they also don't feel angry with you for suing them if you've been injured by the mistake. They also accept that's part of the process, and that's why there is insurance in place to cover it, and that's why we have the system that we do, to make sure that people are compensated. So I think it's 99.9% of doctors are not going to hold it against you if you say, look, I've been injured, things have gone wrong for me, I may not be able to earn as much, I've got this long-term injury, I want some compensation. Most people are going to think that's completely reasonable. I'm not going to hold that against you. I think sometimes if you're suing your GP, it's not a bad idea to change GP surgery, just everybody feels a bit more comfortable. But I don't think you have to, and I don't think you should have to.
Thank you, Simon. I just wanted to mention as well that Simon's firm have sponsored today's event, so yeah, thank you very much for today.